Hi everyone, welcome to Knitting with You, episode 1, the Swatch. My name is Nikki, and today is August 27th, 2014. This video podcast is all about sharing the joy of knitting. Each podcast I will sit and discuss yarns, techniques, and patterns with all of you. My hope is that we all will build up our skills as well as each other as the podcast continues. As today is all about introductions, I thought a great introductory project would be a swatch. A swatch is a sample and a very important tool to knitters. Many of us have skipped over making a swatch, myself included, and it would be good to break that bad habit in my opinion. So let's begin. Today I'm using Red Heart Super Saver and size 8 needles. Here is my skein of Red Heart Super Saver. It's a dark blue. And here are my straight size 8 knitting needles. If you look, some needles have the size on the ends. Some of them are written in here, and some aren't labeled at all. The reason why I have chosen Super Saver for our first knit together is because it's affordable and easily attainable. You could get this at any Walmart or craft store, and I happen to have a lot of it in hand. Okay, so let's cast on. Now, if this is your first time knitting, I would advise just holding your knitting needles. Try switching how you hold them. Find something that feels comfortable. I hold mine like this. I know some people that have like a drum way of holding their needles, excuse me. Today I'm going to use the backward loop cast on. And I'm going to cast on 30 stitches. It's recommended that when you make a swatch, you try to get a sample piece that's at least 4 inches wide and height. So the first thing we're going to do is just tie a little knot. And instead of pulling it tight, we're going to slide our needle through. Now, those of you who already know how to knit, just bear with me. I have some ideas for you to practice with as we go along. Those of you who are knitting for the first time, I'm going to go through this slowly, and hopefully you'll be able to catch on. So this is your first stitch. And you're going to grab your working yarn, and you're going to make an L with your fingers. And you're going to wrap the yarn around your thumb. Bring your forefinger forward, push away, and slide your needle through this little loop that you've made. So now we have 2 stitches. We're going to do that again. There's my L. Turn. Slide that right through. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 10 more to go. This will give us a nice big swatch. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. Now it doesn't have to look pretty. Usually it all gets evened out as we knit. Okay, so for those of you who already are familiar with knitting, what I would suggest as you knit along with us is that if you are a thrower, I would practice picking. And if you are a picker, I would practice throwing. And for teaching purposes, we'll do 4 rows, 2 of throwing and 2 of picking. Excuse me. Okay. So I'm going to try to do this here so we can see. It's a little fiddly, so bear with me. When we start knitting, we're going to insert our needle through the first loop, which is the first stitch. We're going to take our working yarn, and we're going to bring it around. We're going to, let's see, pull it right through, just like that, and we're going to slide off. And you can pull that tight. So we're going to do it again. Insert, wrap around, and pull through. Now this is not my preferred method, so I'm doing it first. So those of you who are learning to knit can see that I'm just as awkward as you may be. So we'll do 2 rows this way, and then we'll show you the other version. Oops, I'm sliding into my standard way. There we go. And once we get done with these 4 rows, you'll have an idea of what feels more comfortable for you. I'm sorry, I'm going everywhere with this. I did do a few practice videos to get an idea of placement and the space I had, but as you can see, I am still adjusting to it. And those of you who do know how to knit, I wonder if you're getting as much amusement out of throwing or picking, which you normally don't do, as I am. Now, my ideas for this podcast is to have a giveaway for each project. And what I would like to do is try a new yarn and a new technique for each project we do. And the giveaway would be the yarn that we have chosen for the project. So that way somebody can knit along for free. I have a thread open on Ravelry under Knittingwithyou that I would love to have input from viewers about this. I already have a skein of Super Save ready to give away. It is a deep green color. I believe it is hunter green. It's my favorite color. So I guess what I will do is wait 2 weeks and then pick a winner at random from the people who have posted, and then we'll send them a skein, and then you can swatch away. Now also, one of the things we'll discuss as we are working on our projects is the yarn itself that we are using. And as I mentioned before, this is Red Heart Super Saver. It is an acrylic worsted weight yarn, very commonly found and affordable. So that's row 1. I'll do one more row this way, and then I'll switch techniques. So what we're doing right now is just the straight knit. And then after 4 rows, we'll do a pattern of knitting and purling, which will result in stocking net, which is something that is commonly used in many patterns for knitting. So here we go, round 2. Whoops. I'm supposed to be using my uncomfortable method. Red Heart Super Saver. Let's talk about the yarn. I have heard people love it, people hate it, people don't really care, they just love to knit. This is what I learned on, so it also has kind of nostalgia for me to be teaching and knitting along using it. I will say, being a mother of 2 small children, it is definitely go-to for me to use acrylics when knitting for children. It is very durable, machine washable, cheap, and there's no dye lots. So if you need to repair, you just go and pick up a skein of the same color and it will match. As for the feel, it's not the softest, but if you wash it a few times, it does soften up, in my experience anyway. It doesn't have a lot of give to it, so you want to make sure as you're knitting you stay relaxed. Otherwise you won't be able to get your needles into the stitches, which I have had happen to me before. I do like the selection of colors in the Red Heart Super Saver line. You can get jewel tones and brights and neutrals, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. What I don't like about it is basically the feel. Once I tried natural fiber, it has changed my whole outlook. And oftentimes I will put off knitting with acrylic until the last possible moment. And I have completed my 2 rows, so now I will switch over to my preferred method. Now, as I'm looking at this, I have noticed that my tension is much tighter than normal, and I'm wondering, for those of you who do know how to knit, if you're finding the same thing using the different technique than what you're used to using. It'd be interesting to hear about that. Okay, so now we're going to go into what I feel more comfortable. I like to wrap the yarn around my pinky to keep my tension. And I insert, and I just swing around, pull through, and slide off. Now, I always get picking and throwing confused. So if anyone wants to enlighten me over what I used first and what I'm using now, please do so. And I apologize if I'm going too fast for anyone who is new. This is my first podcast, and I would love to hear feedback. You can hear the nervousness in my voice. It's all good. I suppose it'd be the same if I was meeting new friends face to face. The clacking is from the back of my needle hitting the desktop. I apologize for the extra sounds. I'm hoping to have a better space to be doing this in weeks to come. I suppose I would also like to hear what kind of techniques interest you, what you'd like to practice or learn, especially for setting up future projects to knit together. Personally, I would like to knit with silk. I've never done so. I've always shied away from the price. I also have 2 small children, and I'm afraid of the fiber getting destroyed. I just recently finished a pair of socks, and while they were, what's the word I'm thinking of? While they were blocking, I had my minis run into the room and snitch them, and it took me a day to find one, and the next day I found the other. So now I need to wash them again and reblock them, and I haven't had a chance to wear them yet. You can see I move much more swiftly using this technique. See, I need to pull some more of my yarn on. One of the things I wanted to mention about swatching is I like to start out with just straight knitting, because if you go directly into stocking net, it will have a tendency to curl on you, and the straight knit edge will help it lie flat. Okay, so we've completed our 4 rows of straight knitting, and now we're going to start on the stocking net pattern. The stocking net is always 1 row of knitting, 1 row of purl, and you switch back and forth between the knitting and the purl. So I'll start with a knit row. And I mentioned earlier that you see stocking net in a lot of knitting. It produces a flat piece of fabric. The knit side is usually the face of the fabric that you see, and the purl side is usually the part that's up against your skin. When you purl, you create a bump in the front. When you knit, you create a bump in the back. So by alternating knitting and purling, you end up with the bumps all on the same side. And on the front you see a series of interconnected little V's. And the V's will always be your individual knit stitches. I guess we can talk a little bit about swatching, why it is so important, and why people skip over it all the time. When you swatch, you make a sample. It gives you an idea of how the yarn will look and feel. And it also gives you a mathematical basis for figuring out how many stitches you will need for your pattern. Okay, as this is our first row of purling, I'm going to take a quick break from talking about swatching and just demonstrate a purl stitch. My camera is not working with me. There we go. Okay. When we knit, we usually hold our working yarn away from us. When we purl, we're going to want to bring it towards us. We're still going to insert, but instead of from front to back, it's going to be side to side, or like right side to left side. And you're going to wrap your working yarn around the top and then pull it through and slide off your stitch. And this is purling. Insert, wrap, pull through, slide off. Insert, wrap, pull through, slide off. So it's not too bad. And it's going to feel strange, especially after doing 4 rows of knitting. But it's one of those things that you'll get used to with time and practice. Practice is always the key. And swatching is a great way to practice, especially if the pattern that you're going to do contains a new textured pattern or a lace or motif. Swatching lets you try it before you buy it, basically. And as it has been said to me, it is easier to redo a swatch than rip out half of your project. So not only does swatching let you feel the fabric, see what the fabric looks like, lets you measure your stitch count and your gauge, it also lets you prepare your muscles and your brain for the manipulating of the yarn that must be done for your project. For example, if you want to do color work, your stranding gauge will probably be different than your straight stocking net, or your cabling will be different, or your texturing will be different. So swatching always gives you a good idea of what's going on, especially if you want to buy a really expensive yarn and you delve right into your project and you hate the way it looks. If you had swatched first, you would have known that the yarn does not look good with the pattern that you intended to make with it. Okay, so we did our purl row. So now we're going to continue with a knit row. So we're going to knit and purl every other row. And as you go along, you will find that you are now creating a much smoother fabric. And when I finish this row, I'll try to get a good view of it for everyone to see. I suppose we can discuss our stories of how we started knitting. And on the discussion board on Ravelry for Knitting With You, I have a small little blurb under the introductions topic about how I started, but we can go into a little bit more detail as we knit together. As soon as I finish this row and try to give you a close-up of how our fabric is looking. Now right now it's all squinched together. We'll spread it out so we can get a better view. And we're going to tilt it up. Now this right here is our 4 rows of knitting. And then the smooth part right here is our stocking knit. And as we keep going, it'll be a lot easier to see. And if I turn this around, you might be able to see the little V's that form. There we go, that's a little better. So each little V is a stitch. Right through down, right through down, right through down. Okay, so now we're on a purl row. Okay, I live in a region of the United States that gets bombarded with snow every winter, and I mean, we get pounded. My grandmother would consistently knit for us mittens and hats and scarves every winter, because being young children and always playing in the snow, we would often lose a mitten or a hat or a scarf. And it was always comforting for me to be sitting in her living room and listening to her knit. And I remember she wouldn't swatch either. She would start knitting, and then she'd call one of us over and slide the project onto us to see if it fit. And she'd always click her tongue if it was too small or too big. And I remember one day As I sat there watching her, I asked if she would show me, and her being the wonderful person that she was, pulled me right up on her lap and proceeded to explain to me the basics of how to knit. Now, all I learned was the knit stitch. I didn't learn purling. I didn't learn stranding, color work, lace work, increasing, decreasing, anything like that. So my first project was basically a straight knit scarf or a garter stitch scarf, because I believe when you straight knit it is just a it's called garter stitch. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so now you can see our smooth fabric portion is slowly growing, and we're on a knit row right now. So basically, my grandmother taught me the basics. And the funny thing is, I didn't really pursue it. My mother was an avid crocheter, and that was kind of my thing. And I still crochet quite frequently, but since my grandmother's passing, I've kind of picked up knitting with a passion. It was interesting when my grandfather told me he had some stuff for me, and he ended up bringing in this huge tote of scrap yarn and my grandmother's old needles and old pattern books, and he told me that I had to knit my husband a pair of pants, which I have not done because I'm pretty sure my husband wouldn't wear knitted pants. In regards to my husband, he is a very amazing person. We have been together for 10 years. He is a cell phone tower climber. I don't know how he does it. I personally am not afraid of heights, but some of the towers he climbs are just downright unnerving. He travels pretty much constantly, and I found that knitting and listening to podcasts, are kind of a way for me to relax after the kids are in bed and after it gets dark and it's time to relax. And I figured this would be a great way to pay it forward, keep my mind off my husband, because I miss him constantly. I really do. He's a wonderful person. I have made him a colored work Fair Isle beanie. I have made him some striped socks, and I've made him a wool sweater, all of which he wears while home because he fears them getting destroyed. And if you've seen some of his work clothes and his gear bag, the fear of them being destroyed is not unfounded. Alright, so now we're on a purl row again. And we're just going to keep working in this fashion. And I figure another 5 rows or so, we might be able to bind off. For those of you who do swatch, what is your preferred method? Do you head straight into stocking net? Do you have a garter stitch border all the way around? Do you do just enough, like an inch by an inch, so you can calculate your gauge? I'd love to hear the different techniques and ways people do things. As this is a podcast for us to all grow in skill, I think sharing each other's techniques and skills and ideas would be very beneficial to everyone. We're moving right along here. I'm going to, in the near future, create a discussion thread regarding what we'd like to see for projects and yarn in further episodes. I have the next project lined up. It is going to be a headband. It is a simple project that delves a little bit further into basic lace knitting. Purposely putting holes in your work. Isn't that amazing? Okay, let's see, we're back to a knit row. I figure the more people that comment and post in the discussion threads will give me more fuel to discuss and talk about while we're knitting, because it's always nice to be able to talk and joke and share things that we've learned. Okay, for those of you who are avid knitters and are hanging out with us, thanks for still being here. And to advance your skill set, I would suggest doing this part blindfolded, because you all know how to knit and purl. And I betcha you're more than capable of doing this blindfolded. And you can feel free to laugh at me, but it'd be interesting to see how you can do it. I have personally knitted blindfolded before, and surprisingly enough, I haven't dropped stitches. I've actually added stitches by accidentally yarning over. Okay, we're on a purl stitch. And you can see now pretty well the flat fabric and then the textured garter straight nick edging. If we turn this around to see the back, you see it's all bumpy. And for those of you who are new to knitting, have at it, feel your fabric, stretch it out, get an opinion, look at your work, pat yourself on the back. You're knitting. Yay! Alrighty, back to purling. A purl row. Yay! Keep up the energy. So I figured the headband project that we could do next would be fun, because you could wear it yourself, give it to a kid, just show it off and say, look what I did. And it'd be the first functional project that we do together. And it'd be pretty small, so it shouldn't take up too much time. And I'm thinking, if this podcast takes off, which I really, really hope it does, that we could definitely get into larger, more advanced projects. I notice that there seems to be little niches that people fall into. For example, some people just like socks. Some people just like sweaters. Some people will knit thousands and thousands of hats. And I figure that maybe, given time, we'll all branch out a little bit of our comfort zone and make some new projects that we can all brag about. Also, it would be fun, I think, to branch out and to use different fiber blends for our knitting. Alpaca, wool blends, silk blends, acrylic and silk, cotton. The list is endless. Oh, by the way, we're on knitting row again. Sorry. And then also, too, I had mentioned before that we could try different techniques in each project. And the same thing goes with knitters. They happen to stick with the same techniques that they're comfortable with. So you'll have some knitters that are all about color work. And you'll have some knitters that are all about textures. You have some knitters that are cable crazy. And you have, of course, the lace knitters. So, again, by branching out, we could totally get ourselves out of the comfort zone and have fun and support each other and practice new techniques that we maybe haven't tried or maybe in the past haven't liked. Maybe we just need to find the right pattern or the right yarn. Okay, purl row. I want to kind of talk a little bit about the needles I'm using. All of my grandmother's needles were these, I believe they're aluminum knitting needles. I find them to be quite loud, but in the legacy of her, I'm using these for our first knit along. And let me pause for a second. Yes, these are Susan Bates size 8s, which I believe you can also find at Walmart or any craft store. They do well with the Red Heart because the Red Heart has a good gritty grip to it. But for wool or some other natural fiber blends, I found them to be slippery. I like to use bamboo knitting needles. I also have some smaller steel tip knitting needles. But I'd also like to try out some new needles as well for our podcast. I'd like to hear what people like to knit with. Also, this is straight or flat knitting, and at some point I'd like to delve into circular knitting. I'd like to look at the double pointed needles, the circular needles, and magic loop methods. And when we get to that point, we could all vote on what we want to do first. I have tried all 3 of those techniques, and honestly, in my opinion, the magic loop is the most frustrating for me. I am on a knit row again, by the way. I think I'll do 2 more rows, and then we'll bind off. Speaking of binding off, I only really know 2 ways to bind off. So that is definitely something I will be exploring in the future, different methods of binding off. I have the standard bind off, and then I know kind of a stretchy bind off. But I'll be doing the standard one today. I know there's a way to this grafting. I've done that with socks, and for some reason it just doesn't feel like a bind off to me. In reality it is. So I guess I know 3 bind offs. Grafting I always hold my breath with. So I guess I could practice that some more too. Maybe we'll do a cowl that we bind off in 2 with grafting. What do you guys think about that idea? And I apologize for any new knitters that might not know the terms that I'm using. But by all means, ask away. I would be happy to try to explain myself. And I'm sure there's others out there that would be more than helpful. I know there's more lingo terms that I need to learn too. I'm on a purl row again, just so you guys know. If you're keeping up with me, awesome with me. If you're ahead, awesome. If you're behind, hey, you're still going, pat yourself on the back. The speed will come with practice. The important thing is to just keep breathing, stay relaxed, try to enjoy it. I'll tell you what, that first scarf I knit for my grandma was probably the world's ugliest thing that has ever been created by hand. But she loved it because she knew that I had poured my heart and soul into it. And I had tried my best. And that's how you should view your projects. You're not always going to like what you make. And sometimes you'll be disappointed. Especially that first time you decide to frog, pull out your stitches. It's heart-wrenching at times. Especially because some things you can put so much time into. So we're doing pretty good with our swatch. I'm pretty sure this isn't 4 inches long, but we definitely have 4 inches of width. So I'm going to do a bind off, and I'll bid you all adieu after that. Send you off to the forums to comment. Alright, let's see if I can get myself under here really well. Okay, to bind off, just my standard bind off, you're going to knit a stitch. You're going to knit another stitch. And here's the fiddly part. Now, this is going to feel weird for all you newbies. You're going to insert your left needle into the first stitch on your right needle. It looks kind of weird. You're going to pull it over the second stitch, like that. And you're going to continue that. So you're going to knit one and pull that stitch over the new stitch. We'll continue in this manner. I know I've mentioned some of my preferences in this podcast. And as I hear my needles click on the desk, I also wanted to mention that I'm a big fan of DPN's double pointed needles, especially shorter ones. These long ones feel quite fiddly in my hands. It feels like I'm hitting every obstacle on this desk with every stitch I make. I find it amusing that in this light, this blue yarn kind of looks green. I suppose you'll have that with some cameras though. Almost done. And then you'll have your first finished object, which is also called FOs. You'll see those all over Ravelry. I'm having some difficulty pronouncing today. We're moving right along. Yay! Can you feel the suspense? Aren't you excited about having your first knit-along finished object? Woohoo! I am excited. This marks a beginning of something that could be pretty darn awesome. I'm totally going to post a picture of this in the Knittingwithyou Ravelry page, finished projects, and I hope to see some swatches that you viewers have completed. And the thing to note is, with swatches, or this project in general, you don't have to have Red Heart Super Saver yarn. You don't have to have size 8 knitting needles. You just want to swatch. And if you do swatch with something other than Red Heart, and if you do post your finished object, your finished swatch, by all means, please tell us what you're using, what you think of the yarn, what you think of the needles you used. Our last stitch. Can you feel it? Yay! Now, I suppose we could weave in the ends, which is something you're supposed to do. And I usually use a crochet hook to do that. Now I'm seeing that I bound off somewhat tightly, and my fabric wants to kind of curve like this. And you can see how the top's trying to curl up. And if I turn it around, you can see our swatch. And if I was swatching for a major project, I probably would have kept going in stocking net about yay high, I would suppose, another 3 inches or so. I'll give you a close-up of the fabric here. Yay! Some people knit so tight that you can't see any light through their fabric, but I'm kind of a looser knitter. But I'm still proud of my swatch. And I had fun talking with you guys. And I really hope to hear from some of you. Love to hear your knitting stories. Love to hear your favorite techniques, your favorite fibers, your favorite tools. your ideas for future projects, and any comments about today's podcast. Thanks for knitting with me. Have a great night.